At 16:17, the USS Abraham Lincoln's Spy-6 radar picks up 87 inbound drone contact from the north, and every defensive system in the formation turns to face them. Every radar sector, every SM-2 assignment, every combat air patrol vector, every fire control solution, the Aegis system begins building at 1,417 and 33 seconds. All of it pointed north. Aloft it focused on 87 Shahid drones dropping to low altitude and spreading across the northern horizon in 3 loose waves. The formation has defeated Shahid swarms before. The procedure ICE established. The engagement is already running exactly as every drill has prepared the crew to expect. 20 miles towed south, for Thunder-class fast attack boats that have been sitting dark and silent among commercial shipping traffic since 6 o'clock that morning receiving a single encrypted transmission at 14:17 and 41 seconds. One burst, 8 seconds, then silence. They go to full power simultaneously. To understand what Iran designed here, you need to understand one specific number. The USS Abraham Lincoln is a nuclear-powered warship. Her 2 A4W reactors generate enough power to operate indefinitely without refueling. She does not need fuel Tomov. She does not need fuel to operate her weapons systems, or her radar, or her combat information center. But every FA-18 on her flight deck needs JP-5 jet fuel to fly. Every Arleigh Burke destroyer in her strike group needs fuel to move. Every helicopter, every support aircraft. The Abraham Lincoln's abilitado project power to keep aircraft in the air, to keep her escorts operational, to keep fighting depends entirely on one ship, the USNS Henry J. Kaiser, a fleet replenishment oiler operating 20 miles south of the formation. 180,000 barrels of JP-5 jet fuel and marine diesel. 125 gun mount, no missile defense systems, a crew of 82 civilians, and 6 military personnel whose entire mission is to keep the Abraham Lincoln flying. If the Kaiser burns, the Abraham Lincoln stops launching aircraft within 48 hours. Her escorts begin losing mobility within 72. The most powerful carrier strike group in the world becomes a stationary nuclear reactor with no ability to project power, sitting in the Arabian Sea waiting for a replacement oiler that is 4 days away. The Iran had not designed a weapon to defeat the Abraham Lincoln's defenses. Iran had designed a weapon to make those defenses irrelevant. Lieutenant Commander James Porter understood this 3 weeks ago. Porteris, the Abraham Lincoln's logistics officer. His job is fuel status, supply chain, support vessel positioning. He does not fire weapons. He does not manage combat systems. He tracks numbers, how much fuel is aboard, how much has been consumed, when the next replenishment is scheduled, where the Kaiser is relative to the formation at any given moment. 3 weeks ago, while updating the strike group's fuel consumption projections, Porter had looked at the Kaiser's position on the tactical display and felt something that had nothing to do with logistics. The Kaiser was 20 miles south of the formation. During every engagement the strike group had fought in this war, every defensive asset had oriented north or northeast toward the Iranian threat axis. Every radar, every interceptor, every combat air patrol track. Nobody was watching the south. Nobody was watching the Kaiser. He had written a one-page assessment and submitted it through the logistics channel. The assessment noted that the Kaiser's defensive profile consisted of a single 25mm gun mount and no electronic warfare capability that during active engagements. The formation's southern sector received minimal radar coverage and that a coordinated attack using a northern distraction to pull defensive attention away from a southern surface threat could place the Kaiser at significant risk before the formation could respond. He had described Iran's entire plan and 3 weeks before Iran executed it. The assessment came back 2 days later, marked, reviewed, and filed. Porter kept watching the south anyway. Every engagement, every drill, every quiet watch period. When the formation was introduced readiness, he pulled up the southern radar picture and looked at it. Not because anyone told him to, because the Kaiser was out there with 1 gun and 82 civilians, and the Iranian threat axis was north, and those 2 facts sitting next to each other in his mind would not leave him alone. He knew what it meant if Iran ever figured out what they had figured out. At 14:17, the moment the drone contacts appeared on the northern display, and the formation's defensive posture snapped north, Porter was already on his secondary display, looking at the southern radar picture. The southern sector was quiet, empty. A commercial shipping moving at normal speeds on normal headings, nothing unusual. 4 minutes and 11 seconds that he watched while the Combat Information Center above him managed 87 drone contacts, and the interceptor count in the vertical launch cells began dropping at 14:21 and 22 seconds. For surface contacts appeared on the southern radar picture bearing 194 range, 31 nautical miles. Speed 41 knots, heading directly toward the Kaiser's position. Small vessels, fast, no radar emissions, no radio traffic, running completely dark. Porter had the Kaiser's position memorized. 20 miles south of the formation, at 41 knots. The fast boats would reach her in 28 minutes and 14 seconds. He picked up the circuit to the Combat Information Center at 14:21 and 31 seconds. The Tactical Action Officer, Lieutenant Commander Hassan OAE, had 87 drone contacts on his display and 11 SM-2 engagements running simultaneously. He had an interceptor expenditure rate that was demanding his full attention and a threat picture that was evolving faster than his fire control teams could manage. Porter told him about the 4 surface contacts bearing 194. He told him their speed and heading. He told him what was 20 miles south of the formation on bearing 194. He told him they had 28 minutes. OAE looked at his display. 87 drones, 11 active engagements, interceptor count dropping. He told Porter he had logged the contact and would assess when the drone engagement permitted. Porter understood what that meant. The drone engagement was not going to permit anything for the next 20 minutes. And in 20 minutes, the fast boats would be 8 miles from the Kaiser with nothing between them and 180,000 barrels soft jet fuel except a single 25mm gun and a crew of civilians who had never been in combat. He did not argue. He closed the circuit to the Combat Information Center and opened a different one. The MH-60, our helicopter assigned to the Abraham Lincoln Southern Sector, had been sitting on the flight deck since 1330 with its crew in the ready room. During drone engagements, the helicopter has no role. The IT cannot engage Shahid drones, and its presence in the airspace creates a confliction problem for the Aegis fire control system. The crew had been waiting for the engagement to end before they could do anything useful. Porter reached the aircraft commander, Lieutenant Marcus Webb, at 14:22 and 8 seconds. He was not the helicopter's tasking authority. He had no operational control over the aircraft. He was a logistics officer calling a helicopter pilot about a surface contact that the Combat Information Center had logged and filed, while managing 87 other problems simultaneously. What he had was a contact report, a targeting bearing, and 27 minutes before 4 fast attack boats reached a ship with 1 gun and 82 civilians on board. He gave Webb everything: the 4 contact bearings, the speed, the heading, the Kaiser's position, the time remaining. He told Webb that the Combat Information Center was managing an active drone engagement and had logged the contact for later assessment. He told Webb that later assessment was going to be too late. Webb asked him one question: "Are you certain about the contact?" Porter had been watching the southern sector for 3 weeks and the 4 contacts for 4 minutes and 52 seconds. He told Webb he was certain. Webb told him to stand by. PT 14:23 and 11 seconds. Webb walked into the Combat Information Center personally and stood in front of OAE's station. He did not use the circuit. He stood there until OAE looked at him, and then he said 4 words. "South sector. 4 contacts." OAE looked at the southern radar picture for the first time since the drone engagement began. 4 contacts bearing 194, speed 41 knots. A heading 014. The Kaiser on the same bearing 20 miles south off the formation. He had 4 seconds off complete clarity about what he was looking at. Then he authorized the helicopter launch. The MH-60 was airborne at 14:24 and 44 seconds. So, 3 minutes and 3 seconds after Porter first reported the contacts, Webb took it south at 155 knots at 200 feet above the water, the AGM-114 Hellfire missiles on its pylons. Already armed, the targeting system's slave towed for surface contacts Porter had been tracking for 6 minutes and 17 seconds. The 4 Thunder-class fast attack boats were running at 41 knots in a loose line of Brest formation, 22 mi south of the Abraham Lincoln and 18 mi north of the Kaiser, when the MH-60 rackered them visually at 14:27 and 33 seconds. Each boat carried 2 Narani-ship missiles and a full fuel load. Each boat had a crew of 8. None of them had radar active. None of them were scanning for air threats. They had been told the formation's defensive attention was entirely focused north. They had been told they had a clear run to the Kaiser. They were right about the formation. They had not accounted for one logistics officer who had been watching their bearing for 3 weeks and had spent 4 minutes and 52 seconds being absolutely certain about what he was seeing before picking up a circuit to a helicopter pilot. The first Hellfire impacted the lead boat at 14:27 and 51 seconds. The missile detonated against the hull above the waterline, and the secondary explosion from the boat's fuel load was visible from the Abraham Lincoln's flight deck 22 miles away. A white flash followed by a rising column of black smoke that the formation slewcouts reported before the Combat Information Center had finished processing the detonation. The second Hellfire found the second boat 9 seconds later. Webb had expended 4 of his 8 Hellfire on the first 2 boats before the surviving crews understood they were under attack. The third boat turned hard to port and accelerated to maximum speed directly away from the helicopter's position. The Hellfire that found it 14 seconds later did not care which direction it was pointing. The fourth boat's crew activated their radar and began acquiring the helicopter as a target. At 14:28 and 22 seconds, they had the new missile's fire control system spinning up in 11 seconds from a valid launch solution when the fourth Hellfire impacted their engine compartment at 14:28 and 31 seconds. For boats, 4 fires on the surface of the Arabian Sea, the Kaiser never changed course. At 14:29, Porter received a message from the Combat Information Center. Single line, contact prosecuted. Good work. He looked at his fuel status display. The Kaiser was still on course, still on schedule, still carrying 180,000 barrels of JP5 and marine diesel toward the replenishment point where the Abraham Lincoln's escorts were due to refuel in 6 hours. The replenishment was still on schedule. The strike group's fuel status was nominal. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. He updated his fuel consumption projections and went back to watching the south. At 1441, the last Shahid drone contact disappeared from the northern tactical display. The drone engagement was over .87 drones, 0 hits. The formation had never stopped flying. The Abraham Lincoln's flight deck had launched 4 aircraft during the engagement and had 3 more on approach for recovery. In Thran, the news arrived in pieces. The drone swarm had been defeated. The 4 fast attack boats that were supposed to reach the Kaiser, while every defensive system was pointed north, had been destroyed 18 miles short of their target by a helicopter that should have had no reason to be airborne. The fuel ship was untouched. The Abraham Lincoln had not stopped flying for a single minute. Iran had spent weeks designing an attack that didn't target the carrier's weapons or its hull or its flight deck. It had targeted the one thing the carrier can't fight without. It had built a distraction large enough to pull every defensive asset in the formation away from the real target and sent 4 fast boats racing toward a ship with one gun.it failed because one logistics officer had written a 1-page assessment 3 weeks ago that came back marked reviewed and filed, and it kept watching the south anyway. Every engagement, every drill, every quiet watch period, pulling up the southern radar picture and looking at it because the Kaiser was out there with 1 gun and 82 civilians, and those 2 facts sitting next to each other in his mind would not leave him alone. The Abraham Lincoln never stopped flying. The Kaiser never stopped sailing. And somewhere in the Arabian Sea, for burning hulls are the answer. Every question Tehran is asking itself tonight about whether the fuel ship was ever going to be enough. Because the one variable Iran didn't account for in weeks of planning was the man whose job had nothing to do with combat and everything to do with keeping one ship alive. He had been watching their bearing for 3 weeks, and he was